Hello friends. Before we get started today, just a quick note. There have been 2 installments of Ants of the Fire, The Legend of Telo. One was episode 44.1 and the other episode 45.2. Please go give those a listen before you jump into the story today. Ants of the Fire, The Legend of Telo by Jack Lee. Part 4, Big Game. The next day, Telo and her nurse were walking through tall blades of grass. Though it was a simple lawn to something the size of a dog or a cat, a lawn was a vast, unexplored jungle to an ant. A jungle made up of many different kinds of grass and clover and weeds and sticks. Telo and Nurse had left their simple hole in the ground and had made a sizable journey deep into the grassy wild. Nurse usually did not like to be too far from the hole they called home. They had never ventured farther than a few minutes from the place they slept, but now they were a long way from home. A long way from their place of shelter and safety. "What do you dream about at night?" Telo asked. Nurse continued her walk through the jungle. She knew that the time was coming when she would have to tell Telo everything. But Telo was not yet ready. Telo needed to practice fighting. She needed to practice hunting and killing giant insects that ants had never faced in groups of 2 and survived. Telo may even have to learn how to face such creatures by herself.
"Nothing that concerns you yet."
"But when will it concern me?"
"After your training."
Telo grew frustrated by her nurse's attitude. Nurse was too protective of Telo, even though Telo was larger and more powerful. Nurse never told Telo anything that she wanted to know or let her do anything that she wanted to do. Telo had spent her entire life as an ant with only one other ant to call her family, but she felt like she was being suffocated. She knew she was meant for more than hunting mites. But Telo was not always cooperative with her daily lessons in hunting, gathering, and survival. She thought that maybe, if she played along for a bit, Nurse would eventually trust Telo with more freedom, or at least acknowledge that Telo was physically superior. "I like when we hunt," Telo said.
"You're not meant to be a hunter. We hunt because we have to eat."
"Then what am I?"
"You're a warrior, and it is high time you were treated as such."
Nurse stopped walking and crept behind a blade of grass. She had spotted a clearing through the jungle and thought she had seen some small movement. Something that would be more of a challenge for Telo than a small mite. She peered into the clearing and noticed a large creature with a black and gray shell. "What is that?" Telo asked.
"That, my dear, is your target."
The creature was a large cricket. A cricket that had grown fat off of grass and other vegetation and was calmly grazing in the small clearing where it could move around without having its body being slammed around by clover and sticks. "That thing is too big," Telo said.
"Sometimes we have to take on big things."
It was the largest creature Telo had ever seen besides herself. "How do I kill it?"
"The exact same way you do a mite. Grab it by his head and stab it."
Telo had wished for a challenge, but now grew afraid of the size of the cricket. The inexperienced side of her feared being killed. What if it trampled her when she tried to approach it? The part of her that dreamt and longed to kill big creatures, such as this one, feared another kind of failure. What if the cricket ran away? Telo didn't want to die and didn't want the prey to get away. She had wanted a challenge, but this seems too much. She tried to make some excuses. "I don't think I'm strong enough to fight that thing," she said matter-of-factly.
"We won't know until you attack it."
"Well, what if it is faster than me?"
"It's not. Just stab it before it has a chance to run."
"But stab it where, nurse? I stab mites in the chest or the back. I don't think I can even reach that thing's head." Nurse grew impatient. She knew that she was getting older. If she did not train Telo to fight and kill large creatures such as this, there would be no hope of her ever completing the task that only she and Telo could complete. Telo had to learn to fight, and she had to learn now.
"I would try to stab him in the face or the neck."
Telo gave her nurse a dismissive look. Nurse had to take more drastic measures.
"You can either face that creature over there,"
the nurse said, placing her 6 legs into a combative stance and lowering her head as if she were ready to charge,
"or you can face me, right here."
Nurse placed her legs into that combative stance, stomping about, ensuring that Telo knew it was a combative stance, and again, readied for the charge. Telo laughed a little inside. There was no way that Nurse would ever manage to defeat her in a fight. But Telo would miss her nurse. This was the only family that she had ever known, and Nurse did raise her and feed her and teach her to hunt. And she was getting hungry. This creature in the clearing would provide a large feast for her and Nurse. Nurse was starting to get weaker and frailer in old age. Telo knew that. Telo owed it to Nurse to provide some food for once. She decided that she couldn't let this cricket escape. She did not give Nurse a second look, and Telo crept into the clearing, hiding behind wide blades of grass. She needed a way to get on top of the cricket if she was going to have any chance of reaching its neck or face. She found a blade of grass that hung just above the cricket's head. She crept up the blade in silence, being careful not to let her feet make any kind of squeaking noises against the waxy surface. When she was at the top of the blade, she looked down and began to have second thoughts. She started to feel guilty about killing this defenseless creature just to make a point. Telo was designed to fight, but she wished for war against other warriors. This creature was meant for grazing in open fields and carousing with others of its kind. Just as she was having these thoughts, the cricket began to rub its legs together and make strange noises. Telo had heard these noises at night while she tried to sleep. They were particularly annoying to listen to up close, like a high-pitched, screechy bird song that ebbed and flowed with the sole purpose of grating on her nerves. But in the evenings, it became a beautiful symphony. Telo finally stilled her courage and leapt from the top of the blade. She cut through the air and heard the wind. She'd never been that high above the ground before. Today was full of firsts. She landed on the cricket's back and startled the large creature. The cricket's shell was brittle compared to her own, definitely not designed for the horrors of having a warrior ant attack it. What the cricket's exterior lacked in strength, however, it more than made up for in coverage. As the cricket started to buck and jump around the clearing, Telo's feet slid along the cricket's back. She needed a soft, fleshy place to bury her pincers so that she could hang on. She dug her feet into the cricket's back and finally found a bare place in the cricket's light armor, a small gap between its head and its back that allowed the cricket to turn its head. Telo thrusted her head downward to clamp onto the cricket's neck. Her pincers were just about to make contact when the cricket leapt high into the air and turned its body sideways. Telo felt her feet slide along the cricket's outer surface. She scampered to stand on the creature, but her feet could not find a place to hold. She slipped off and crashed into the ground. Telo landed with a loud thud. She shook her head to regain her sense of place and time, but the world was blurry. She looked up through the open spaces of the jungle and saw a brief glimpse of blue sky. A voice pulled her back to earth.
"I told you to bite his head,"
Nurse said. She was enjoying the show from the safety of her nearby clover.
"Well, he's gone now,"
Telo said, still trying to regain her footing. She wandered back into the clearing, trying to find ample space where she could reorient herself to her surroundings.
"You'd better turn around."
Telo turned her head to see the cricket back in the clearing. Its head was down, and its large black eyes were trained on Telo. It grinded the many moving parts of its mouth and twitched its legs.
"Do these things usually run away?"
Telo thought. The cricket charged. Its eyes narrowed. It scurried through the clearing and flung its body at Telo. She crouched to the ground, and the cricket's body sailed over the top of her head, crashing into a few lone stalks of clover. The cricket became tangled in the mess and struggled to be free.
"These things don't run away after all,"
Telo thought. Telo ran to the other side of the clearing, looking for some kind of vantage point. Her eyes surveyed around the edge of the grass for some low-hanging leaf that she could climb to for safety. But she heard the sounds of a second charge coming up from behind her. She turned to see the cricket rushing towards her. She didn't have time to mount some kind of surprise attack from above like before. She had to figure out how to make use of what little time and space she had. She reached out with her antennae. The cricket's head was close enough for her to touch. She felt the rough edges of her antennae attached to the cricket's smooth head. Then, something happened that Telo had not expected. Her panic subsided, and the world slowed down. The cricket, though still charging at top speed, seemed to be standing still to Telo. The joints of her antennae felt electric with life and purpose. She felt the creature's minute motions and knew exactly what the creature would do next. She was not in the cricket's mind, but she may as well have been. She sensed the beginnings of every moment, every motion it would take. In the brief instant of time between Telo's antennae touching the cricket's head and the cricket crashing into Telo's body, Telo clamped onto the creature's face with her pincers. She bowed and angled her segmented body through the cricket's moving mouth parts out of reach of any kind of danger and buried her stinger into the underside of the cricket's head. The cricket thrashed and moved and shook, trying to throw Telo away to the ground. It tried to beat her off with its antennae, thrashing itself in its own face and forming welts and indentions across its head. Telo dodged every one of the cricket's moves and buried her stinger into the cricket's body. She rested her antennae against the cricket's head and thought for a moment that she felt the creature's mind. It was like she knew all of the cricket's inner workings, every weak point and vulnerable place. She took advantage of the cricket's slowing movement to pump as much poison into the creature as she could. She clenched down tighter with her pincers as her venom shot through her stinger and into the cricket's shell. The cricket's movements became slower and slower, and it began to stumble around the clearing as Telo's venom ate through its veins and paralyzed its organs. Telo began slashing her stinger from side to side, cutting and ripping the cricket's throat. She wrapped her powerful legs around the cricket's head and pulled with all of her strength. She felt the sudden breaks in the cricket's body. She heard the cracks in its outer shell. She felt a sense of urgency that she had never felt before. A lingering feeling of expectations and failed purpose. It all culminated in her sudden lust for the creature's death. She needed to kill it. She needed to feel its lifeless body beneath her feet. She took one last, long look into the cricket's eyes. She saw nothing but dimness. Nothing but dark. She pulled with one final ounce of strength. The cricket's head ripped out of its body, sending splashes of green and black fluids all over the ground. Telo held the cricket's head in her pinchers and legs for a moment and felt its life's liquids rain over her. She felt whole for the first time in her life. Telo tossed the head to the side and ran inside the body, licking and tasting the insides of the cricket. She was so caught up in the kill that she didn't realize how hungry she was. She tore into the cricket shell, consuming mouthfuls of its gooey, light green flesh. Nurse stood atop her safe perch at a distance, her insides swelling with joy. She had waited so long for Telo to be ready to take on large creatures and prevail, for her to be ready to play the part of a warrior. She was so excited that the words were unable to remain in her thoughts and emerged from her mouth.
She is ready.
Thank you for listening to Part 4 of Ants of the Fire, The Legend of Telo, titled Big Game, from an original novella by Jack Lee and produced by me, Jared I. McGee. Jack Lee is from the American South. He enjoys clean water, fresh air, and tall trees. He writes when time and sanity allow. The opening track in the background of the story is from freesound.org. It comes from Nominum and is being used under an Attribution 3.0 unported license. For more music by Nominum, head over to nominum.bandcamp.com. The longer track comes from the Free Music Archive and is titled 8, and is by the artist Cathedral of Chemical Equilibrium. The track is being used under a public domain Mark 1.0 license. That does it for Prose this week. Please plan on joining us again in 2 weeks' time to see what the world is like now that Telo knows she is a born killer. Until then, love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is always stranger than fiction.